Siku ya Jumapili kisa kilitokea saa 12:30. Divers wa Navy walikuja wakaingia ndani ya maji kwa muda wa 45 minutes. Kukawa ni usiku. Kama sasa ndani ya maji ni giza zaidi. Ikabidi watoke. Wakaja jana walipokuja waliingia ndio wakaspot, wakaona mahali walitumia roboti zao ama drones, waka identify 2 places. Wakajaribu, lakini hali ya anga ndani haikuwa sawa. Ikabidi kwamba leo wakaongeza vifaa. Ndio unaona tumesema tumehaya private divers. Kenya Navy wameongeza vifaa vingine, wamekuja na kamera maalum, wameidentify ni wapi wameona hizo objects. Kesho mbinu zao ni kutoa mwili. Kwa hivyo sikusema kwamba haikufanyika. Walikuja Jumapili ikawa masani kidogo giza likaingia. Wakaja jana walitumbukia mara kadhaa. Si uliona Kanolo hapa na watu wake 50 wote wako ndani ya maji wanajaribu. Hatungekuwa tunajaribu kama hatungetaka kutoa mwili. Dhamira yetu ni mwili utoke. Ndio tunaomba wananchi, kesho tutafunga feri kwa masaa matatu, masaa mawili. Tunaomba hata katika hilo saa moja mwili ukitoka tutasema ni nafuu kwa sababu ya familia.
Haya, mwili ukitoka tutasema ni nafuu kwa sababu ya familia. 48 hours down the line, we are still struggling to get the bodies of a mother and her daughter who drowned in Mombasa on Sunday at about 6 p.m. So 48 hours down the line, a multi-agency team has started a search operation to retrieve the car that plunged into Indian Ocean, of course, with the mother and her daughter. So we've seen all this the whole day. We have a team in Mombasa comprising of Tobias Chanji, and they've been covering this whole operation for us. At some point, we had a presser by the MD Kenya Ferry just outlining what they have done, what they have achieved so far, and saying the whole operation is being hampered, A, by darkness, 2, the currents. And he said it's a difficult scenario. It's a complex operation that you don't just dive into. There's lots of things to put into consideration. But this evening on The Big Story, I want to ask a question. Where is government? And it's not just about what we witnessed in Mombasa on Sunday. There are several other issues that make you sit down and ask, where is the Kenyan government? Do we have a government that actually cares for her people? That is the conversation we're having this evening. We will be speaking to Professor Alfred Omenya, who's a governance expert. He's here in studio with me. I'll also be speaking to George Msamali, who's a security expert, just to pick his mind on the role of the Kenyan Navy at the coast, because lots of fingers have been pointed at the Navy. They're next door. I mean, these are guys who are practicing for Mashujaa Day. How long does it take them to get down on the ground? At some point, we'll speak to our lead reporter, Duncan Haimba, as well. But for now, let me bring in Tobias Chanji, who's joining us from Mombasa. He's been covering this for us since Sunday. Tobias, good evening. I know you've been there since morning. The rescue operation, I know, has been halted because they say they cannot operate in the dark. But what else do we know about this entire operation today?
Very good evening, Linda. As you've heard it from Danny Mwazo, who is the chairperson of the board of the Kenya Ferry Services, had said that the operation started on Sunday for 45 minutes, but we can't really be sure or establish if there was an operation because just beside this crossing channel, there's the Mamangina beachfront, and most of the Navy personnel and also other soldiers have been engaging in training in preparation of the Mashujaa Day celebrations that will be happening down here. And a while ago, the chairman said that they're suspending operations because of the darkness that was coming, but at the same time assured that they've seen the 2 bodies of the mother and her kid who perished or who plunged into the waters on Sunday evening. This is totally a different information from what the private divers have been able to speak on camera a while ago, just before starting this news program. They say that they haven't seen anybody inside the waters. They haven't seen any vehicle inside the waters, and that they are praying God so that come tomorrow, maybe they'll be able to locate it so that they can start preparations for retrieving those bodies. But today's operations was done jointly between the Kenya Navy Service and the private divers. But on the other side, the Kenya Navy says they located the two bodies, and maybe the operations of retrieving them will start tomorrow. And all operations, ferry operations, have been suspended between 9 a.m. and 12 noon. Those are 3 hours that people will not be crossing either from Likoni to Mombasa Island or from Mombasa Island to Likoni mainland. Linda.
Yeah, so that whole operation will be halted for, I think, 3 hours tomorrow. But tell me, so there's been a little bit of contradiction. On one hand, you have official statements saying the car and indeed the bodies have been spotted somewhere. But then you have local divers saying that may not be it.
Yeah, it has been a contradicting information, though after the private divers said that they've not located anything. I had to ask them if they are doing this so that maybe they can be added more money, because remember that the family that had catered for this operation, then they said it's not the case. But on the other side, when I engaged Dan Mwazo, that's the chairperson of the Kenya Ferry Services, he said for sure they located the two bodies around 60 meters deeper. And just as an assurance, he said that a few journalists will be going with the divers tomorrow at 9 a.m. Deep in the waters to make sure if they can spot the bodies, so that they can tell the entire world that they've seen the bodies, and the operation or the process of retrieving those bodies can start between that 9 a.m. and 12 noon.
Okay, so 9 a.m. and 12 noon, the operations at the Likoni channel will be halted, just to try and see if we can get or recover both the bodies of the mother and her daughter and the car. So let's see how that goes. Tobias Chanji reporting live from Likoni in Mombasa. Thank you for your time, Tobias. So let me bring in our lead reporter, Duncan Haimba. Haimba, can you hear me? Haimba, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Linda. I can hear you, Linda.
You have a member of parliament there who sits in the transport committee, so maybe you can pick his mind on what happened on Sunday and how the government has dealt with it since then.
Yes, this member that sits in that committee is not just the member, but is the vice chair, the Transport, Public Works and Housing Committee of the National Assembly. And I would want to know from him, first of all, it's now 74 hours. And as clearly as my colleague Tobias Chanji has painted that picture, of course, we saw him speaking to the family spokesperson of the victim that have been identified as having been in that vehicle that plunged into the Indian Ocean. They've painted a picture of a helpless family to an extent that they've even gone to an extent of forking 100,000 shillings, which was a down payment to private divers that had promised to go down under the sea and actually retrieve the body. And of course, they've said the government will be taking charge. I've spoken to the government spokesperson, Colonel Retired Cyrus Oguna. He's flown to Mombasa. I think we should be able to be getting in touch with him any moment from now. But more importantly, among the leadership, among a representative of the leadership of this country, 74 hours later, we have the Kenya Ferry Services, we have the Kenya Coast Guards that were launched, we have the Kenya Navy on the ground, the emergency services. What does this speak of our state of preparedness? And as a committee, what can you say? 74 hours down the line, nothing has been cited yet.
Very well in Khaimba. We had a meeting of the committee this morning, which I chaired, and we expressed our deep concern about this state of preparedness. I think this is not just an issue of the ferry, but an issue of national security, given that this accident happened at the prime point of our maritime, touch point with our country, and so therefore one would wonder if this was, for example, God forbid, a terrorist attack, is this the kind of preparedness we would see at the Kenyan coast? So we have summoned today the Cabinet Secretary for Transport on Thursday, day after tomorrow, to appear before our committee and hopefully answer questions about this preparedness. But I can confirm to you that as Parliament, this is an issue of grave concern and that you're not taking lightly.
Mheshimiwa, not taking it lightly, but more worrying to the taxpayer was the pomp and color that we witnessed when the president flew down to Mombasa and launched the Kenya Coast Guard services. Of course, it involved a lot.
Yes.
We also have the Kenya Navy that, of course, we know they are mandate, but in such calamity, of course, we expect them to also be at the forefront. We have the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. We have the Kenya Ferry Services Board. We have the Kenya Ports Authority. 5 strong government institutions, surely.
Well, for me, I think the first port of call would be the Kenya Navy, because that is their natural habitat. But as it happens in these kind of situations, you find that there's a lot of, broken conversation between these agencies. What we have seen before in terms of our emergency response, especially on terrorism, we saw improvement the other day, especially during the Dusit attack, and simply because the DCI, took direct charge of that particular operation. So sadly, I think what is happening within this disaster is that everybody is expecting the other to take charge. And I think we need also to ask ourselves that we have got NDOC, the National Disaster Operations Center, who is supposed to do all the coordination of these agencies. So it's a worrying situation, and I think we are going to get to the bottom of the matter. But having said that, the issue of the emergency response, the issue of rescue, not having a standby rescue by our ferry, it's also something we wanted to ask the Cabinet Secretary. We have been very concerned as a committee about the management of Kenya Ferry Services. Very, very, very unacceptable, practices there. The issue of the new ferries that are supposed to be procured from Turkey. We've been given now another date for January. We hope it will be there, because much as I don't want to preempt exactly what caused this particular incident, but we've had whispers and rumors about the quality of the existing ferries, and that is exactly why, as a committee, we've been pushing to have the new ferries from Turkey to be with us as soon as possible. Of course, another transaction that is in itself mired with a lot of questions about the propriety of that transaction. And we'll be really, taking to task the Cabinet Secretary to make some drastic changes in the management of Kenya Ferry Services, which I believe are long overdue.
Yes, as we wait for the Cabinet Secretary to appear before your committee on Thursday, the fact that it's 74 hours and no word from the Cabinet Secretary and is in this capital, and neither has he flown down to Mombasa, what does this talk in terms of maybe the common man will think if it entails or if it involves a lesser person or those people who are low in the community? Maybe people are not moved, because how come it's over 72 hours and the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has not given any communication? The only communication we've had is from the government spokesperson, who's issued a statement this afternoon.
Yeah, and indeed those concerns are legitimate, and that's some of the things that we are going to be discussing with the Cabinet Secretary and the Principal Secretary as well, and also raising further questions about the much-touted preparedness for Kenya for the blue economy, because if by just this unfortunate accident and the way we have responded to it shows that we are nowhere near being, the leading world player in maritime affairs and blue economy as we would want to project. Yeah.
And finally, before I let you go, we know that it's 25 years down the line, sadly, after we had a similar tragedy, because that one was on a bigger scale. And then we are having it 25 years down the line. We've had, yesterday I spoke to Likoni Member of Parliament, Mishimboko, who said these incidences have been happening and they seem to have been using their own resources to retrieve vehicles that plunge into the ocean and all that. So what does this mean overall in terms of our disaster management? Is it that we are a country that can't learn, won't learn, or what is the situation?
If this would happen in other countries, some people would be held, would be culpable for criminal liability. because it is just that negligence is equal to murder. But the minute something happens and then we just assume it is management failure. You look at what's happening with other countries where, people resign or people are taken to court for criminal, liability. I think I'm yet to be convinced from where I stand that someone at Kenya Ferry Service will not be facing criminal liability for this incident. Yeah.
And finally, there was, I'm sure you're on social media, there was that post by Interior PS Dr. Karanja Kibisho on the pomp and color we expect on Mashujaa Day. And the Navy seems to be going ahead. They will be performing a historic ritual. The first time they'll be handing over a flag to the president. That has never happened. But as you've said, this is their habitat. The fact that the rehearsals for Mashujaa Day are going on, of course, ordinarily Kenyans would have expected to see guys in white or whatever in their combat gear, in their natural habitat. The fact that we are not seeing the color and the incident has just happened a few meters from their base. What does this also talk in terms of their response? Because clearly that is their purview.
Well, it would be very irresponsible of me. These are our armed forces, and we have no other armed forces. So I would want to leave it at that. Yeah.
But the fact that they are going on with rehearsals and there's a tragedy there, and they are the Navy.
Our armed forces are always right. And in case they are wrong, refer to the above. Thank you.
Well, Linda, that is Mheshimiwa Moses Kuria. Of course, I've touched on the defense forces. You have said those are forces. If you know, they say, if you know, you know. He doesn't want to wade into that. But I said, by and large, the bottom line is somebody has to take responsibility. More so the Kenya Ferry Services, or the Kenya Ferry Services, or the management actually at the Kenya Ferry, because people are asking hard questions. Emergency services or divers that are supposed to accompany, because not everybody who boards a ferry can swim. So those are the questions that everybody is asking. Of course, we saw the chairman of the Kenya Ferry Services Board, former senator for Taita Taveta, Dan Mwazo, saying that the divers on Sunday night, they went under for 45 minutes. It was dark. He said yesterday they sighted, and then today he says that they've been able to locate some objects. Of course, some are disputing. Of course, the divers have said that they are yet to cite anything. So a lot of disjointed communication that is coming down from the scene of the accident. But as of we've said, the government spokesperson, who is also a retired military officer, has flown to Mombasa this evening. So we do expect that maybe tomorrow we'll be now getting clear information, details, and hopefully that the recovery will be successful after more than 74 hours. Linda, over to you in studio.
Chaim, it's actually 48 hours, not 72. This happened on Sunday, so that makes it 48 hours, but all the same, thank you for speaking to Moses Kuria. I mean, he says, we're pushing to improve the services. And that coming from a leader is part of the reason why I'm having this conversation, where is the government? These are ferries that keep moving people from one end to the other, about 3,000 in a day. We spoke to the MD Kenya Ferry Services yesterday, and he said, maybe we can improve, and we're still trying to see if we can get divers and improve the operations of the ferries, and maybe in January we'll get a new ferry. We spoke to someone from Maritime Security, said, but we've raised these issues with Kenya Ferry Services, and they're not listening to us, and perhaps that is why we are here. And Kenyans are asking, 48 hours down the line, where is the Kenyan government? Duncan Haimba has touched on a few of the issues that I want to raise in this conversation. We are yet to hear anything from the Transport Cabinet Secretary. He's gone mum. There's a statement that was released by government spokesperson Sarah Suguna, and the last paragraph, which I'll read for you, is a little bit of a concern for me. And the response we had from Kenya Ferry Services, and of course, the back and forth that is going on with Kenyans asking, so where does this fall? So we're speaking to Professor Alfred Omenya, who is a governance expert, and we also have George Musamali, who's a security expert. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on The Big Story this evening. Professor, let me begin with you. Just listening into Moses Kuria and the fact that it's 48 hours down the line, we are yet to recover the bodies of the mother and the daughter. What comes into mind in terms of where is the government in how this entire operation has been carried out?
Thank you, Linda. I think I would like to start by by actually commending Korea. I think he's the only one who's not hiding things. He's saying things as they are, apart from the matter of the military. As has been highlighted, this is an area where we have a number of government institutions operating within the area, from the Kenya ports to the Navy, to the fisheries, to the Kenya ferry that is directly responsible for this, to coast guards. There are actually very many government agencies that are very well resourced, and they all work within this particular area, and they do have a disaster responsibility within their areas of operation. Then, of course, we have other government agencies. He did mention the National Disaster Operations Center, of course, Ministry of Transport, and basically none of these people are on the ground. What we are hearing is very sad, that it is the bereaved who is forking out money to get private divers, to be able to retrieve the body in the first instance. This is a major indictment to our government. In fact, I think on that alone, somebody should have already resigned. We heard a bit earlier about the divers themselves not having the equipment, saying that they generally had equipment and oxygen backup for up to 30 meters, and then they realized that this particular area where the vehicle went under, they would go all the way to 60 meters, and they needed different equipment. Again, if you listen to that sort of nonsense, that sort of crap, coming from a country that spends so much money on these institutions with very many different boards, this is very, very sad indeed. What you're seeing, Linda, is basically failure of government institutions. Number one, to prevent a disaster from happening. This could have easily been prevented. This was very preventable. We cannot say that it was an inevitable accident. That particular MV Harambee was condemned in 2011. We wonder what it's still doing there. There's a government intent on killing its citizens. And after that happens, what do we get? All these institutions that have taxpayers' monies basically disappeared, don't take any responsibility, and we see the lead and the responsibility being pushed by the private divers. To add insult to injury, the military is basically training on that same ground. Mamangina Drive is just a stone throw away from the Likoni place where this disaster happened. I
have a bite from Interior PS Karanja Kibicho. I'll play it a little bit later. But George Msamali, there's a statement that was released today by government spokesperson Colonel Cyrus Oguna, and allow me to read the final bit of it. It says, meanwhile, the government is putting in place measures to improve procedures at all crossing points in order to enhance safety of commuters to avoid similar incidents in future. The government is putting in place measures now. These are ferries that are moving around 3,000 people. Now is when you want to put adequate measures in place. What does that say?
I think, Linda, what I would say is that in Kenya, we have a culture. We've developed a culture which I would call a syndrome, which I would call a Bora Afya syndrome. Anything passes. We've lowered the standard for our leaders, and this is why you'll find that even now, they are able to talk like that. This is not the first time we've had a disaster at the ferry. Remember, 25 years ago, we had the Mtongwe ferry disaster. What did we learn from that? What measures did we put in place? As professors pointed out, MV Harambee was supposed to be decommissioned in 2011. Why is it still doing the trips? I mean, this was a disaster in waiting, and it has always been this kind of thing that has been happening in Kenya. We've been losing lives, we've been taking excuses, and we've been letting it pass. And I believe what our leaders know about us Kenyans is that 2 days from now, we would have forgotten about this issue. And we will not take anybody to responsibility. I think time has come now when Kenyans should come out and force somebody to fall on his sword. Because clearly, the Likoni Channel was a disaster in waiting. What did we do about it? We are talking about the Navy arriving there in 45 minutes. That was pretty quick, depending on other disasters that we've witnessed. But did they have equipment? Were they properly resourced for this kind of rescue? I mean, it was not a rescue per se, because this was already beyond salvage. What remained was recovery. And I think we are seeing that kind of apathy, because now we are not coming in to rescue, but we are coming in to recover. And I think this is why it is taking them so long. This is why now the government, the family so desperately went to look for private divers who I don't think are better trained and equipped than our Kenya Navy. What is happening to our organizations? We have the KPA there, we have the Kenya Ferry. Were they properly prepared? I think the issue here is being prepared and planning for such disasters. Okay. What is ailing Kenya is that when it comes to such matters, we look at the bottom line, the financial implications. We can't buy equipment that we cannot use for more than 20 years. And I think this is where now we need to focus on. Kuria and his team need to look at our disaster preparedness. We have a National Disaster Center in Nairobi. Do we have it across the country? Do we have it in the regions? I talked to somebody and he said, no, everything happens in Nairobi. And the county governments are supposed to take care of their own disasters if they happen. And if they require the involvement of the national government, then this is when the national government will come in. And I think already life would have been lost. Okay. Let's look at it very clearly, and we'll realize that at some point we've dropped the ball, leader.
You see, there's this concern that I have as well. The only reason why Kenya's talking about this, and the only reason why we are now seeing a movement from the Navy, Kenya Ferry, and indeed government officials, is because someone took the time, someone recorded this live and posted it on social media. So if this had not been posted on social media, then the residents there would still continue using a ferry that was written off a couple of years ago. The ferries would still operate without divers. We're not even sure if they're going to get divers in the first place. This would have gone on, and perhaps would have witnessed a bigger disaster, bigger than this. So my question is there no one at all who saw this? Is there no one at all who sat down and said, this is a concern, this is a disaster in waiting, because if this happens, we have no divers, we have no disaster response team. What are we doing to Kenyans, really? 3,000 of them every single day. So let's take our first break, and then we look at why fingers are being pointed at the Kenya Navy and the Coast Guard and Kenya Ferry, and what they could have done better, and why Kenyans feel the government dropped the ball on this one.